Welcome once again to Syntax Error, your pretentious philosophical pedantic podcast ostensibly about video gaming and related topics therein. Warning, this podcast contains mature language, content, and spoilers. You have been warned. Alright, welcome back to Syntax Error. We are discussing today, this is Ian's idea, but I'll be hosting. We're discussing, or going to break down, in Fallout New Vegas, there seem to be tiers of other characters who may be equal to the protagonist that you play as the courier. We're going to sort of discuss which ones we think they are and which sort of category they fall into, like perhaps levels of them. So I, of course, am Scott Thurlow, as I said, joined here by Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Viva New Vegas.
And Stephen Amosi.
Hello.
Alright, so let's sort of give a broad overview about New Vegas, sort of a refresher for those who may have forgotten, as we ourselves had to do a bit of research. In New Vegas, you, the player, are a courier, who the initial setup is you are shot in the head, I believe, yes?
Yes.
Dumped in your shallow grave.
Thus creating these classic setup of video game amnesia. And you are sent on a sort of follow the trail of what happened to you, what you were carrying as your courier mission, and why, and who's connected to it all. And during the course of this story / plot, you run into other characters who could be said to be affecting the world and the plot in the same sense that you are. I think we said something precast that in it's different than almost any other ones in the sense that, Ian, yes?
Okay. In history, there's a debate over whether
The great man theory, yes,
influence history, or whether it is a kind of tide of human subconscious that brings about the idea of, like, Hitler was never born. Would World War II have played out the way it did, or would someone have taken over his role, or any other figure you want, like from Alexander the Great to Socrates? Would someone have developed these ideas? There's actually to the point of it being kind of a subconscious the inventions. Like the printing press, I believe there were like 3 printing presses that were developed at the same time.
Yes.
But it was the Gutenberg printing press that became the
which rose to prominence,
one.
Yes.
So, you, like, most video games, I find, have you play the great man of history.
That is absolutely true.
In Bethesda, particularly,
by and large, yes.
Even though this isn't done by Bethesda, you're usually, like, ordained by God to play the... Oblivion was slightly off with that, where you're supporting the kind of ordained character.
Sort of, but you basically become it anyways.
Yes. But I feel that New Vegas is one of those, like, very strange, like, works that really has you play a part of the tide of force of history versus being the agent of change for the universe.
Yes, I think that's well true, that's well said, and I agree. And you brought up an interesting point. New Vegas was produced by Bethesda, but not... published, I'm sorry, not produced by Black Isle, I believe, did it.
Yes.
Or Obsidian, who is formerly Black Isle, who did the first 2 Fallout games. So that's why I think, like, some of the things you see in Vegas are not present in 3 and 4, as we talked a bit about, because they're sort of, in a sense, remaining more, not more true, but truer to the 1 and 2 like way of incorporating all these things. So I think, which is why this one specifically we can point to and say there are other characters in the world that could be are shaping the plot and so forth in the same way that you are, and it's not just you being the great man of history, right. It's you being a smaller part of it, in a sense.
In this one, you're just trying to survive, whereas in the other ones, you're trying to build the world, around you. Even though in Fallout 3 and now in Fallout 4, you really have a very personal mission. Everything that goes on in the world kind of centers around you, even to the point where the radio stations are talking about you, and everyone around has heard of your exploits and things like that, which happens, I think, a little bit.
It's true in Vegas too, but the whole point of this episode is to point out the fact that it's not the same level that you've seen in many others, and certainly in the other Fallouts.
Well, would you like to delve into?
Sure.
I'd like to start with what I feel are the parallels to, and the most obvious one is Ulysses.
Yes, I'm going to say that as well, of course.
Who is another courier. He is working for Kaiser's Legion, and it seems, I think he's the greatest parallel that you have here.
I agree with that.
Who, theoretically, you could have played this entire game through his point of view, and it would have potentially had the same impact.
You almost sort of did, in a sense, if you think. Like, he's basically the opposite side of the coin to you. Mm-hmm. He's not necessarily your foil, but he provides a mirror for your character, and especially in Lonesome Road, where they fill out more of his backstory. So I agree that we sort of, to start out with, we were trying to sort of lay out the characters we think are equal to that level, and I think he's number one for sure.
Well, even though you meet him in Lonesome Road, he's present throughout your
his
entire...
presence, at least, is felt. His impact.
I played New Vegas before all the DLCs were released, and I remember you actually introduced to him in Prim. I know there's another courier who turned down this
you get
mission.
hints of him and so forth in his backstory, even if you don't meet him personally till much later on to the DLCs.
And in a way, if you hadn't had that history, and we'll get into why that connection later on, but he would have been the one to take this package, and he would have been the one who was
supposed to, if you recall his backstory, and he turned it down because of the backstory related to you.
That one event, that small little flip of a coin, in a way,
exactly,
made you the protagonist and not him. And that's such a to meet, I don't remember many games
that had
where you actually meet someone who's like that, just the mirror of you, that could have been the protagonist.
I was actually going to bring one up. It kind of reminds me of, you guys may laugh at this, but like your rival in any of the Pokemon games, like takes whatever path you choose, they choose the opposite path. So like you can choose one of three paths, to start. When I played the Pokemon like Game Boy game back when I was in high school or whatever, you start off by choosing you take one of three choices. Your rival, depending on which one you pick, picks one of the other two.
He picks the one that beats yours,
right? And he picks the one that's tougher. That as far as like the rock paper scissors of Pokemon goes, he picks the one that beats you, and you kind of go down this like mirrored path of like him, like to you, in your eyes being like the evil one, but like that's not necessarily true. He's just kind of going down the path that you would have gone if you had picked the one that he chose.
To continue on your tangent, I also want to bring up another Black Isle game, Baldur's Gate, which is one of my favorite scenes I've ever played a video game.
You sure Black Isle did that?
I'm pretty sure.
I thought Blizzard did it.
No. They did the original Fallouts and the original Baldur's Gate. You end up going to a bar randomly. You don't have to go there. It's just a random side quest type thing. You end up meeting another party of adventurers who's heard about your exploits, and like you get into like having rounds of drinks and like a friendship, and then a third party of adventurers comes in, and you basically get into a bar brawl. But I feel like again, it's Black Isle, so it kind of has this like element of like you are a small cog in the greater.
You aren't the be-all end-all hero of the world without you. That turns upon everything else.
Great mechanisms are operating around you, but that doesn't mean that you are directly affecting them all the time, like in a lot of games.
Sure. So let's. So I think we can agree Ulysses is like the most obvious example of something like that. But
do you want to give the history of Ulysses?
Sure, we can. Or it's rather extensive, but essentially, he was from a tribe called the Twisted Hairs, I believe, who was conquered by Caesar Legion and betrayed by Caesar Legion. They sort of were drafted into his army, and then Ulysses was charged with sort of training them, and after Caesar betrayed them, he was the only survivor, and he sort of joined Caesar because it gave him a sense of purpose, which is like his entire story. Basically, his character is looking for something to believe in, and he says that a lot in his speeches and the holotapes you can find of him and so forth. So he sort of became the first. There's a term for this in this Kaiser's army, the Frumentari, the spies. He was the first person or the first one from across the Colorado to find the Hoover Dam. In essentially, like, he kicked off the war between the Hoover Dam because we reported it back to Kaiser, and therefore he decided to take it from the territory that the NCR was in. Beyond that, further than that, is that he was in what is the name of in Lonesome Road? There's like Asheville or Hopetown or something like that. He stumbled upon a town where your courier's backstory is that you brought a package previous to the setup of New Vegas, and which set off the nukes in the town, and he was hoping to Ulysses, that is, was hoping to make this town his new home, and by your one action, being a courier, destroyed his dream, and therefore he sort of kicks off on a revenge trail against you. Again, like almost mirroring step for step a lot of the things that you do as a player. And eventually you encounter him in Lonesome Road, and I think that's the last DLC for Vegas, so it was like the final, like almost
Lonesome Road was the last one. But
the full circle conclusion to it.
He goes to the Big Empty, which you do. We'll
his presence
later.
Again is felt in many places. He goes to Sierra Madre.
A courier, and it turns out there are a lot of couriers are spies for the Kaiser's Legion.
Right.
So, again, and it's also fascinating to me to have a quest, which you're dealing with the repercussions of something that's happened a long time ago, and actually dealing with the victims of choices that your character has made.
One of the developers, I think, or like one of the lead designers of Lonesome Road, said something. He's like, I found it fascinating, the idea of my character being hunted by another character for something that happened in the past, and that's why I felt Lonesome Road was the most interesting one. But yeah, I mean, that's what their setup was, and it's, again, as we said, it's quite interesting to have another character who's basically you, again, the flip side of your coin, but he can be an antagonist, or at least approaches that in some senses. Mm-hmm. Right. But let's, since that's the most clear one, and we just laid out this entire history, let's pick out some other ones that we think might be equal, and I will say Benny possibly approaches that.
I disagree with. I think that he wishes to be on your level.
But he's not good enough.
Yes, actually. He doesn't possess the right character traits to be an agent of change. And I don't know what exactly is what... do you think that there is something inherent in these characters that will... that the rest...
either raises or lowers them?
Rest, in a sense?
Well, before we go any further, let's do this, because when did Vegas come out? 2010,
maybe before
something like that. Whenever it came out, that was when I played it, and like I did a little bit of research before this, but some of these characters I'm going to be a little fuzzy on. So with Benny,
unprepared as usual.
Benny is Chandler Bing.
He's the leader of the Tops of the gang.
Okay, yeah.
And he's the one.
He is planning to overthrow Mr. House.
Right.
He's the one who shoots you and takes the platinum chip, which is Mr. House's way to
trump card.
Yes, to make all the Securitrons his or arm them all, and you are hunting him for most of the game.
Yes,
and then you
yes.
could either kill him in the casino, or he ends up fleeing to Kaiser's where he's imprisoned. And
I think he's crucified. You can find him crucified.
You can have him crucified, or you can kill him in one-on-one combat.
Right.
I believe that when I was playing, I killed him, in unarmed combat, right? You have the melee
you
fight
don't
with
have
him.
to, but it's one of the choices.
I thought they took your guns or something.
Yeah, I believe they do.
Yeah. So, I definitely remember that now.
Right. But regardless, the point is, like, he has his own little schemes. It's like the Batman thing. Benny has got schemes, and like everyone has got schemes. But yeah, he's sort of acting behind the background. He's an impetus for change, for sure. He's interacting with all the major factions. We can say that the leaders sort of are disqualified. So Kaiser is Kaiser and Mr. House are above that. They're not equivalent protagonists in the sense that we're talking about.
Right.
They're sort of like the quest givers, the overlords of each little area that they rule over. But Benny, I think, approaches this behind Ulysses. He approaches that level of trying to have, again, enacting his own plans, trying to find a place for himself, and usurping others, and doing his going around the Mojave, enacting his little schemes.
Yeah, but I think that you can't.
But he's not as good. Yeah, I agree with that in a sense.
He grasps for it and then falls.
Sure,
reaching for the Holy Grail.
Well, he's approaching that. But I think he's still interesting enough character that he sort of he reaches for the stars but falls flat and gets crucified or murdered in the end.
I'm gonna raise you on this and say okay. Joshua Graham.
I was waiting for you to bring him up.
Is not quite the parallel that he's between Benny and Ulysses.
I kind of agree with that.
In a sense, he has almost the same failings that Benny has. Both are very vain individuals, particularly previous to when you meet him. Steve, if you remember, he's the Burning Man. He failed the first conquering of Hoover Dam by Kaiser,
right,
and was lit on fire and thrown into the Grand Canyon.
He was the first legate, I believe, for Kaiser.
And he survived that and then became more... And I actually wonder if this is... that Ulysses is a very philosophical individual.
Yes.
He considers the repercussions of his actions. Benny doesn't, almost. He's more
very narrow-minded.
Impulsive.
Yeah.
He's more...
Agree.
And Joshua Graham was very impulsive, and they talk about it. His
See
brutality,
where it got him?
His brutality was made... I remember reading, tactically, he wasn't fantastic. He wasn't a great fighter. He just happened to be...
Right.
His energy, his drive led him to where he was.
Sort of. A bit of a backstory. He was part of a tribe from New Canaan. I forget what tribe
he was. Actually, he was a Mormon missionary.
Yeah, but whatever tribe he was from was if you recall, in Lonesome Hearts, which is the weakest of the OCs, but it's focused on him, if you remember. It's about
Honest Hearts.
Honest Hearts. It's his survival. Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
So it's shown that his backstory is his tribe knew how to make like 45 automatic pistols, something like that. So he was familiar with some weapons. He was more capable than Benny. I'll agree with that. And he was an agent of change, like sort of as a backstory for a time. And then you meet him again, when he's sort of like not turning his life around, but has turned a new road.
Right.
But in a
where
sense,
it formerly came from.
You meet him, I think, as having fallen from grace.
Yes.
And trying to rebuild his position as and it's a very narrow agent of change.
He realized he can control this very small section, and so he has been. But he no longer he feels he no longer needs to reach out beyond that. He's found his calling, if you will, within that little space.
But to the point of Benny, they both fell from the height of trying to grasp for that role in the world. And while Benny died, Joshua Graham survived and realized his limitations.
Fair enough. I like that. One more I think is perhaps we can discuss this one. He's more in the DLCs, but his presence is felt throughout them. His father Elijah, if you remember that, he was a former Brotherhood of Steel member. He sort of went rogue. His methods were unsound, if you will. That's what they said about him. And he was the one who tried to find the Seer Mount and did find it. He went through the Big Empty as well.
Right.
So you can follow his path around when you finally confront him. Like his story is quite interesting, and he again shaped the world in a certain sense, perhaps behind the scenes more, but nevertheless he can be considered, I think, a protagonist-ish player. If
I might get philosophical again, I think that Father Elijah does fit in this role. Perhaps he's between Ulysses and Joshua Graham, and that he reached to become Mr. House. He reached to become Kaiser. He reached for that leadership position, and that wasn't his calling. He was meant to be the agent of change, and when he fell, he aspired for too much, and he became almost a monster because of it.
Yeah,
because again he had aspirations beyond. And in a way, you could think of New Vegas as how to find your role in the world.
I agree with that. It's a very interesting philosophical point, but I think you can see that in these characters and some of the things that their actions and how they shape the world and interact with the other characters. So I think those are
May I bring up another character who, in a sense, could have been an agent of change?
Well, that's what I was getting to next. Sort of the second tier.
Then, is there anyone else who?
Well, see, there's some we can argue about. I have Volpes Incolta, who's who took over basically Lucy's role. He's the number one. He's the lead Frumentari, and he's actually the quest giver. He's probably the intro character to Kaiser's Legion, but he's also affecting the world, but to a lesser degree than some of the others.
I would put him on the third level down.
I'm just saying we can discuss where he fits.
I would think perhaps the Monster of the West,
Legate Lanius,
perhaps has that role, but he is.
His role is just more one. He's just all muscle, essentially.
Yeah, but where Joshua Graham had that bridge between philosophical and brutality, Legate Lanius is just brutality.
That's true.
So he has no. I would be interested to see what would happen if, upon Kaiser's death, Legate Lanius took full control. It would have lost any. I feel it almost would have lost any ambition, and they would have reverted.
I think there is an ending that mentions something like that. It can happen, but I agree. He's more narrow-minded of a character and thus narrow focus. So. He might be shaping the setting and world in a sense, but again, only in one aspect and not as broadly as the other ones are.
Well, he would be bringing them back to complete barbarism instead of trying to accomplish any actual goals in terms of humanity.
Exactly. So I agree that him and Volpes as well are sort of one level down. And perhaps I had this one on my list, Christine Royce, who was another former member of the Brothers, who was tasked with assassinating Father Elijah after he went off the deep end, essentially. But she also, her story...
She's fourth tier.
Yeah, again, you encounter snippets of her, and even she can become she is plot dement, but thou must plot it in Dead Money to be a companion, but that's pretty much it.
If we're going to go to third tier, I want to talk about a man who succeeds perfectly at the third tier.
Okay.
The King.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, he and Joshua Graham, at the end, if you play it to where they both are alive and retain their positions of power, Joshua Graham and the King almost have the same role at the end.
In a sense, yeah, they're parallels.
In their narrow scope are effective leaders. The king does not aspire to become like
Mr. House
an
or
actual
anything.
king. He
Right.
enjoys his
He's king of the kings, and that's it.
yes,
And he can handle that.
and
Just run their
it
own
shows
little-
him. Yeah, it shows him being a very successful leader at the local level.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, like his success comes from his releasing of that desire for more.
His ambition is
yeah.
focused enough that he doesn't overextend himself, if you will.
And if we talk about, we'll eventually talk about first tier characters, the ambition destroy. Like
Sure,
in a sense, you become Littlefinger's the climb story.
Yeah.
Like,
But that's like the commentary. I think like they're sort of imparting, and that's what I think is interesting about this selection of characters and interactions with them that you don't see in the other Fallouts. But I think Steve had something else he wanted to bring up. Not quite characters, but things that could be related to this.
I was more looking into, when I was researching, I was more thinking about like what would I have liked to have played, as you know, whereas you guys I think are talking more about like what are the parallels between yourself and other characters. I was thinking like
stories that could have expanded upon.
Yeah, like
that
if
were
you
interesting,
these characters could have been a protagonist. I was thinking like what character or what characters or even settings would I like to have been the protagonists of their own game, perhaps. And I was looking at the Repcom test site where there are I think you come into it and you just encounter a bunch of feral ghouls, right, that are just like surrounding it, and then you finally break through and get in, and it's this big rocket testing site, and eventually you can send a ghoul into space,
so you
right?
send a whole bunch of ghouls into space.
Jason Bright is the sort of the cult leader, the ghoul cult leader of
I
them.
never actually did that, although I did have extensive.
You didn't?
No, I never sent anybody into space. I don't think
You're not a
But
great man of history.
I guess not. I didn't want to be.
Fair enough.
I just wanted to be a courier, man.
But there's one more actually I think we glossed over a bit, but let's go back. Just tell me what tier you think. Maybe 2 to 3, I would guess, is the think tank, or Mobius specifically in the think tank in the Big Mountain. They have a narrow scope. Their backstory is interesting. They're former scientists who are now brains in vats. It's brains in Mr. Handies, essentially, who have gone like AI insane, or they've been reprogrammed too many times, and so forth. And so aspects of their personality are sliced out, so they're psychotic, they're sort of schizophrenic. And in order to... Mobius is set up as the villain in this, but really, as you play through it and you discover more of the backstory, he's keeping them all in there so they don't devastate the rest of the Mojave.
Well, I think that they perceive themselves as tier 1.
Sure, of course they would, but they're
when
not
they're
really.
in tier 3. And I think that, again, I like to think that this has quite a lot of commentary on qualities of leadership.
Yes.
That they aspire so grandly to like power that they're almost limited in their...
They're doing things for science, really, and no longer for morality, which is the whole like problem that Mobius realized, and then he himself started going insane. So it's like one insane robot trying to keep 5 or 6 others in check while they're all like degenerating.
But did Dr. Mobius make the Cheetah Men? That's the problem.
No.
Very obscure reference.
Yes, well.
Actually, there's a number of other tier 3, like you have the cons, which again aspired for greatness and were broken by the NCR. Mm-hmm. And now they're probably tier 4 in like
they dropped in status, exactly.
Just trying to survive. In drug peddlers. I don't think you can count the Fiends in any way as having any
really.
power.
They're just a small raider group, like a well-organized raider group, but nevertheless, they don't have any ambitions other than beyond being raiders, really.
Yeah, the powder gangers,
Mm-hmm.
who have ambitions, but
again,
don't yet
ones.
have the...
Well, here's a flip side to them, I think, is the boomers. Like, they're sort of the more, like, not reserved, but educated, perhaps, version of them.
Yes.
But their goals and their methods certainly, essentially, are pretty much the same.
No, that's absolutely a good point. But again, like they have no aspiration for any power beyond.
Right. Well, they want to rule their little land and
that's
screw anybody else who comes from the outside.
Cover their turf and
You have the Nightkin Town.
Yeah, well, I actually like the Nightkin Town. It's great. But no, I mean, you're right. Same thing. They just want to be don't look at them, and they want to live in their little town because they're addicted to a certain drug in the world that alters their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So, should we move on to the dominant
Sure.
players in this world? You have sorry. Before we do that, though, I would like to go to the Followers of the Apocalypse, which are personally my favorite group. In a way, you could almost see them as having also parallels to the Big Empty, that they're both, in a sense, for science, but it's for science with morality.
Yes.
And I would actually like to see an interaction between the Followers of the Apocalypse and the robots from the beginning.
But they're also like pacifists, so they probably get destroyed by anything. That's why they're a very small organization, because they keep getting stomped on by various other ones.
The Followers of the Apocalypse tends to create the worst in the wasteland.
I don't know.
They created Kaiser.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I agree with that. It's like they created them. He was one of them.
Yeah, but I think that the idea is even though a pacifist, it attracts that type of individual who...
Maybe. Well, that goes back to your original question of the great man of history, which is a very interesting one for sure. It's just that I don't know if I necessarily agree that it was their fault that he became Kaiser. He got the training and education from them, or at least the education, if nothing else. Sure, but would he have always done that? That's an interesting question, I would think.
It is like, do we blame Aristotle for Alexander the Great conquering the world?
Yeah.
That's a fair point. But
speaking of Kaiser,
you have Kaiser, you have yourself, who could potentially become that tier 1 if you
possibly, if you choose a certain route, for sure.
You have the NCR, which it's not a great man, it's a collection of democracy.
I mean, it's run by a general, but ostensibly they call themselves a democracy. Yeah, and Mr. House.
Oh, they have a president.
President Trump. Yeah, but he's not, he's more of a figurehead than an actual, but anyways.
Aren't all leaders of democracy?
They need him as more of a, again, a symbol than actual power, but...
So where would you like to start chipping in?
Well, I like Mr. House, at least his backstory and setup, because he's basically the smartest guy in the world, and he saw everything coming and planned for it, and has plans to yes, of course, they're his own design, but nevertheless he has a plan, a grand scheme, if you will, to, if not unite, to make the Mojave safe, or at least safe for the people he deems it safe for, in his own name. Now, it will be stable, but stable controlled by him.
What is the difference between Mr. House and Kaiser?
Method, I would think. I think they're both equally. And Mr. House is probably still more intelligent, right? Because
they're both highly intelligent.
He was the CEO of Robco and all that. Yeah, but as I recall, it outright stated that he predicted when the war was going to happen and what a lot of the things that were going to happen afterwards.
He's also Walt Disney.
Yeah,
kind of. It's the man behind the curtain. He's like the wizard,
Yeah, he is that, and it's even sort of shown to you when you encounter him.
And you also see both of these individuals as authoritarians.
Yes,
which is what they are. Mm-hmm. Have their distinct flaws in almost in the way of needing other people, and which is a concept of that goes against the great man.
Well, maybe not.
Mr. House, who's probably the most capable individual in the entire world at this point, is trapped in a box.
Yeah, but he's
on life support.
How old is he supposed to be? It's
more than 200.
200 years old or whatever. Yeah,
that you can easily kill if you so wish with a golf club. I think you get an achievement for our.
Or you could just turn off his life support or whatever. Yeah, but yes, he's in a very precarious position. Nevertheless, he's sort of the most prepared individual.
Right. Well, that's why he survived for 200 years as it is.
No, he survived for 200 years because he didn't reveal himself.
Fair enough.
And he used proxies, and that's but Kaiser also Kaiser's dying of a brain tumor, and he goes through it by for instance, Mr. House trusted Benny, and Benny betrayed him.
True.
Mm-hmm. And then
should he have?
He trusted you.
He should have predicted that.
And you could have betrayed him. So in a sense, Mr. House is limited by by needing other people, but Kaiser is the same way. He has more ability to punish people, but that kind of idea of needing to give quests out, the limited range of the scope and requiring others to float, could just as easily destroy them.
Sort of. Well, I mean, like you said, they can almost be seen as clear parallels on opposite sides of the coin with their methods and visions.
Yeah, but that's anyone who rises to that level of power in any situation. Well, you're gonna have to depend on people, and it comes down to the Machiavellian, what's better, fear or love.
I think that's the commentary they're sort of going for. If you can see it in this game, even though it may just sort of be there on top, but if you look deeper into it, I think that's one of the interesting points they're making.
No, but Mr. House, yes, Kaiser is very much about the fear. He burned the people who failed him alive and threw them off. He's willing to kill people, if they give the slightest show of weakness, because he needs to. That's the problem with fear, is that to rule by
keep
fear,
it going,
you have to
continue, making people fear you.
Mr. House is almost the Orwellian idea of wanting to replace as many parts with machines as possible. That I have robots to do everything for me, but he still needs that like in a sense maybe that's Yes Man's. Could be a Benny reprogrammed Yes Man, but in a way like the idea of having he even got betrayed by his own robots,
right?
Yeah,
in a way that and just that limit he has. I don't know. I think it's a fascinating discussion on both ends of a man with a unlimited human army in front of him and a man with an unlimited robot and technology, but both have the same failings.
Sure, like I said, like it's one of the interesting points, and I want
Just
to
send wave after wave of your own men at them until they hit their preset kill limit.
Yeah, but you can reprogram with a different kill limit. But you said something about this on a previous cast, and I like to bring it up here, where it was sort of a joke, or it was one of your playthroughs in Vegas. But you said you played as Forrest Gump essentially,
yes.
where like, but it's sort of even if you weren't doing it to that extent or in that same way, you sort of are like central to these events, but not the driver of them. You're just there for all of them, which I think is interesting, which goes back to the original point of this entire episode, where you could be replaced by another, like a handful of other characters. It may have played out more or less the same.
Yeah, I mean I think that's the whole idea of making you this character that has really an unknown backstory in the beginning, is that you, as the player, can literally put yourself into this situation and be that person. It's just, it's just a skin for you to wear while you're playing.
Yes.
But also in a sense that, regardless of what skin you're wearing, and if you even existed, all of these events would happen. The battle for the Hoover Dam would have happened. And I think it's
like I said, it might have played out differently, but if the forces at large are still going to do what they're going to do.
If you work for Legion, you assassinate the president. If you work for the NCR, an assassin comes for the president.
Mm-hmm.
So, regardless, it's almost in a way if you're playing that philosophical concept of possible worlds. Of, well, what if I had chosen to work for this company instead of this company? And you get to see, and I actually think this is a really great design, that you get to see parallel events just from different points of view.
For sure.
So, they would have killed him anyway. Or the attempt on the life would have happened anyway, regardless of whether you were pulling the trigger or protecting. But to that point, that's actually an interesting argument for democracy in here. That, the NCR has a lot of flaws throughout all of this. But where the democracy, you can have a lot of, you can remove one of the cogs.
And it'll still keep going. Yeah, sure.
Like you remove Kaiser, the Legion is almost done. Or at least it fundamentally changed.
It's crippled at least.
You kill one general, one soldier, one president from the NCR. The NCR still exists as it is, and you might change its mentality a little bit. You might dissuade, if the president got assassinated, you might dissuade the citizens of the NCR from wanting to pursue further conquests, but it still does not limit its existence.
Well, sure. I mean, the whole point, that's a broader point that Fallout itself as a series seems to address. How do you rebuild society and what works and what doesn't? Usually it's going to crumble. They don't often give a positive message. Some characters can have a better ending, if you will, or better outcome than others. But I think the best thing about this series is that it leaves it open. And I think New Vegas is the most obvious example of that, of posing those questions to you, but never answering them. And giving you, as you said, sort of multiple interpretations of various ways it could have gone down, but the broader actions are still going to happen because war never changes, essentially.
Right. Well, that's why I love the Fallout games. They kind of stay on that point the entire way, and the games start at an interesting point and they end at an interesting point. But that is by no means. There's so much history beforehand, and there's so much left undone and open ended at the end of it.
So many wars to come.
Yeah, it would never changes.
For sure, as I said. But I think it's more obvious in perhaps one of the best displays of it in New Vegas, and especially the fact that you can sort of interchange a couple characters, and you're not as integral to the whole plot and at large, but you're sort of an observer in a sense. Yeah, you're an observer / participant for some of them, but like you said, it raises the question of whether or not you were there. What would it actually have changed in the end?
Well, in a way, I feel that the only ending that really depends upon you is the one where you rule New Vegas.
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
But beyond that, that's in a sense just one possible world. So I'd like to ask you guys a question. What do you think the best ending is?
The best ending?
Or
for the future, Wasteland?
For the future of the Wasteland. What do you think the best ending is?
So I don't think about it. As I recall my playthrough, I of course turned the Securitron army to me and threatened everybody, but I sort of like made peace. Like I killed Mr. House and Caesar, I think. Or I left Mr. House to die or something like that. Like, so I can't remember what the possible ones are, but the best one
Killed both of them.
would be like, see, that's the question. Like, there is no real answer to that. You're asking me which one I think, but
I want to know your philosophical point of view.
well, then the one I did, of course,
Or you rule.
yeah, where I mostly rule.
Yeah, I took both.
I'm
of
smarter
them
than
and,
everybody else.
Left a whole power vacuum and just kind of wandered away. I think into the.
I left a couple of things stable. Like the king is stable in his little this little arena. The great khans were sort of stable. Yes, they were like their power was reduced, but they were still left. They weren't completely broken or murdered. So I sort of like have these like shaky alliances, which I think is sort of the whole point of like again broadly. That's how it sort of goes.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have a I didn't end up ruling, New Vegas or anything like that. I killed Mr. House, and then I killed Kaiser, and then I forget exactly. Like I must have just wandered away. I think that's what
Wandered back into the desert.
If that's an ending that you can have, that's definitely what I would have done.
Mad Max ending.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I played all 4 endings. While in a lot of ways I actually agree with Kaiser's point of view, he's the only intelligent man. Or actually, that's not true. There are other members that are, but he's created such a brutal society that when he's gone, it'll
Collapse.
devolve
Yeah.
into just
Gonna collapse.
like
Yeah.
becoming monsters.
Right.
Me running the place, I'm just some courier, and I don't
Not
think
anymore. King Courier now.
And I feel that it would have, in a sense, that would delay the inevitable. I might have stopped Kaiser. I might have stopped.
Yeah, but that's the whole point, as we were saying. Go on.
The NCR I don't trust either because it's a big bureaucracy. And yes, I guess that's the truth. If I believed in American values and democracy and the double-headed bear, that would be the way to go. But I actually feel that Mr. House is, for the preservation of the
Probably
Mojave
the best
wasteland,
choice.
the
I might
best
agree to
choice. In a sense, because I feel that over the course I have promoted the local leaders as the most successful in, you have the king, Joshua Graham, when he decides to, they all are searching for, the NCR is not looking for the welfare of its people, it's looking for the welfare of itself as a nation. I feel that Mr. House would, yes, perhaps be a little bit authoritarian, but would benefit the New Vegas. And in a sense, I made peace between the king and Mr. House.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's the idea of order and stability in a place of chaos.
Right. I believe, as I recall, if you do have in this house, the ending narration is something like the Vegas Strip becomes stable but isolated. So yeah, sure, like it may be the best for Vegas, but at large it may not be. But nevertheless, he stabilizes it. People are safe within that narrow range.
So
But again, for how long? When Mr.
Well,
House
that's the
is
whole
so
point. Yeah.
frail,
What if Lucy shows up and murders him instead of me?
Oh,
Well,
he'd just be shut at his
But
door.
that's the open question. But that's interesting to think about. But that's what I'm saying. Like again, goes back to what we just said a few minutes ago, where they don't give you any solid answers. Each choice is sort of viable on its own, and you can point out the pros and cons of them all.
Mm.
But there's never going to be a happy ending, and you could always say, what about what happens next?
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the reign of the Night Kings.
Right.
They'll never reign. They don't want to be seen. They can't reign without
They
being
can
seen.
be heard.
That's true.
Well, someday supermoons kill everything.
Yeah. Just waiting for it.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the day when we can choose to work for the master again. I'll side with him. Well, anyone got any final thoughts on the philosophy or characters of Vegas? I think we
Yeah.
broke it down and had some interesting tangents and points about how they can reflect each other and how you're not quite the dragonborn of this world
Yeah.
as you were in many other Bethesda games, whether Fallout or Elder Scrolls.
I enjoyed the refresher on Vegas. I'm actually going through like what my roommate's playing right now and watching him play. So like that's a lot of fun too. Like going back and
Getting all the
seeing that
backstory.
stuff. Yeah.
Sure.
I'm running through Fallout 4 as Claire from Lost now, so but baby,
And I am I've become Captain Willard from Apocalypse Now in Fallout 4. So we'll talk about our stories in Fallout 4 later on when we're done.
or check out the podcast Fallout 4 First Impressions.
All right. Well, for all things Fallout and anything else, make sure to turn back into syntax error, and we'll see you next time.
Have a good one.
See you later. The horror.
The horror.
Mojave, mo problems. This has been Syntax Error. Thank you as always for listening, and we will see you next time.
Music by Stephen Armosi. Editing and engineering by Scott Thurlow.
Syntax Error is part of a Lost Signals Productions. All rights reserved.